Alright, who has a 100-word summary of all the trouble you got into last session?
We fought robots. Adrex punted one like a football.
Like a football?
Like a kickball.
Yeah, Adrex strikes me as a kickball sort.
Yeah.
Four squared kickball.
4 squared kickball.
What about
I
hopscotch?
mean, I got in that conversation with an old man. A legendary old man.
Legendary
Yeah,
old
we're
man?
about to.
Yeah.
Legendary
May or
Gary
may not be a
Oldman.
dragon.
No, he's a
I
dragon.
mean, he's pretty clearly a dragon.
Yeah.
That part's not really in question.
Also,
no,
he might be played by Alex Trebek, is what I was hearing from last week.
I'm still
Right.
not entirely sure on how real dragons are. Because we did find the dragon remote.
Yeah, we did find out that dragons are robots, apparently.
So I'm not 100% sure how dragons have children.
Like he didn't. They're not really children. They're constructs made out of his soul. Is what it.
Not
like,
this dragon, but we've definitely found dragons with children.
Oh yeah.
And is
So all I'm saying is someone banged that construct.
is Adrex going to have a Rudy Rough Night moment where he slits his wrist and it's just going to be metal parts?
Yeah, like how did Adrex happen? That's my question. And when I say that's my question, I mean I've literally written that question down as you asked last week.
Like, okay, so first of all, A+ on the Wild Arms reference. Thank you. Second of all, you said there was like 30 or 40 children, right? They all know different things. We went over here and met and I think he's a gold dragon. Is that what he said?
Yeah, well he's
That's
very
kinda what
golden.
Kind of where we're leaning right now.
His aesthetic seems very gold. One of my other questions I wrote down is, how do you feel about that demon blading your aesthetic?
Also, there was that guy who we suspect might have been a dragon from the Underdark.
The one who was totally a dragon?
Absolutely, totally a dragon.
I wasn't even here for that session, and I know he's a dragon.
Dragons are assholes.
That's what Adrex has been saying.
Yeah, we can't, I think a few of us came up with some questions for the interim.
Good. That shows initiative. Unfortunately, oh, you know what? I was about to say I don't have any of those little foil stickers, but no, Peanut broke her classroom down last week, so I'll bet nuts to nickels I actually do have some little colorful foil star stickers.
Hold on,
Oh man,
What was that expression?
Nuts to nickels?
That's
Never heard that
Nuts
one.
to nickels.
It's like dollars to donuts, but with nuts.
yeah,
Instead of-
dollars.
Yeah, no. Dollars to Donuts is a time-honored classic.
Man, that expression's kind of swapped, right? Because I bet back when it started,
Yeah,
Dollar
donuts were less than $1.
yeah. But now it's
Yeah,
just
you're
like,
right.
yeah, it's
Now you're really
absolutely
hoping for the
$1
donut.
from donuts.
I mean,
No
I think it
problem.
works a lot better if you're hoping for a donut, honestly. Just on a psychological level, I think getting a donut is good.
Yeah.
One of the greatest trials of my life, this happens on a weekly basis, is I will go to Wawa to get a sandwich. You know, as you do.
Yeah.
And you go to the computer and you punch in your sandwich. You take your little thing up and you pay the lady. Then you got to go walk over to where the sandwich receptacle guy is.
Yep.
Yeah.
And standing there right behind me is a case of Krispy Kreme donuts. And I'm like,
Oh,
well,
no.
shit, this case of Krispy Kreme should be between the door and the computer so I know to buy them when I come in to get... I can't buy one now. I've already paid for my sandwich.
Yep.
Like, I can't go back to the register. Can I also have this donut, please? Like, come on.
Yeah.
The register lady will say, "No, you can't have a donut."
I have a very similar problem when I go to the grocery store because they've got all the discount soda on the way out, and it's like, well, wait a second here. Like, you're kind of just incentivizing me because I don't want to turn around to just steal this soda because it's right by the exit door. Like,
Maybe they're just expecting people will steal it.
Just shove a bunch of 2-liters under your arms and run out like the Hamburglar.
Well, it's a big box with a handhold.
Did you see
It
that?
could not be more stealable.
Robble, robble.
So, speaking of Rubble, yes, you had made it to Wizard's Folly.
Yes.
And you have been speaking to Breniar, the Great Glimmer,
Brainiar, that's
who
his
has
name.
invited you into his solar to discuss a great manner of topics.
Yeah.
And I do not have that text file open. Yes, I do. It's right there.
Nice. Good work.
Yeah, I know.
Best thinking.
So you gave us a bunch of topics to ruminate on before we concluded last week.
That is correct. And he is
And
going to
I
be
guess-
discussing this will be the great campaign exposition dump. So
I think now we should just go over the talking points to start with, and I guess see where the conversation goes after that. So he wants to talk about Gedwinax, the black dragon that we passed and menaced on our way up here.
So what are you asking about Gadwinax? When you broach this subject.
Are you the one who? So we've heard from others in out and about on the plateau that you that you humbled this dragon, that you crippled him, took most of its hoard, and left him to basically rot in that cave.
Breniar tells you he wouldn't characterize it exactly like that, but that he could understand how an outside observer might do so. He explains that there are many paths from the Southlands up onto the plateaus, and the one that you climbed was the closest to his realm, and that rather expend any of his own energy to guard that path. He doesn't
You
use
instead
the
have
word
a prisoner cover it.
He doesn't use the word prisoner or trickery or any of this. What he explains is that he used Gadwinax's nature against him. That at one point Gadwinax, as a younger dragon, took the mine for his lair. Gadwinax originally was from much further south, where there are many more swamplands, which is where Black Dragon is more likely to inhabit. Breniar doesn't know the dragon's past, but assumes that it was pushed out of its own lands somehow, flew north and found this abandoned mine, started amassing treasure there, and before he was able to grow too powerful, he essentially goaded Gadwinax into challenging him. And Gadwinax lost badly. But instead of outright killing him, he allowed him to slink back to his mine. So the passage is guarded by a powerful creature that Breniar knows will never abandon the post and is unlikely to ever be defeated.
That seems efficient.
So in his prime, how did Gadwinax compare to, say, I don't remember his name because we're not looking at the map, the dragon where Birdie's from?
He tells you that he's only familiar with your sire by name, that his dealings have never taken him quite that far south. In his younger days, Breniar speaking of his own younger days, he would travel when there were great civilizations to the south. He would travel amongst them, much in a form that you see before you now. And they had heard the name of this dragon taking up residence in the marshlands. But he never heard of this dragon going out beyond its borders, or doing much to harass or raid the local populations. He assumes, since the entire Southlands is not overrun with this black dragon's realm, that to this day he's not concerned.
No, it's just basically tribes of various different bloodlines and what have you, vying for power in one place or another, and there are no borders down there.
It's the depredations of. Oh, sorry.
It's very fluid out there.
Is the
Oh, there's one
depredations of
big-
dragons something you concern yourself with?
Is the what?
Depredations of dragons something you concern yourself with?
He tells you that he would be remiss in his duties if he didn't at least keep tabs on his neighbors, so to speak.
What are your duties?
To that, he takes a seat, and he takes up one of the great decanters of wine behind him, and he fills the goblet in front of him, places the decanter in the center of table so that it was in reach of all of you, sitting at this round table in the middle of his solar. He says that his duties delineate the greatest difference between his kind and those of the lesser dragons, the whites and blacks and greens and reds and what have you. He tells you that all dragons are born as gods on the earth. That all dragons have within them the capacity for tremendous, miraculous magic, a small fraction of which you have seen since you've entered his realm. But the base dragons trade this divine spark away early in their existence to fuel their own greed. And this is how you end up with sad and lesser creatures like the great black that lives in the mine, the great red that you encountered in the mountains to the south, and I presume, and he turns to Adrex, your sire as well, to the north.
Yeah. Yeah.
So wait, do magical dragon gods like have to take a vow of poverty?
And he kind of squirrels his face up a little bit, as though considering the question. And he says that he's never thought of it in exactly that way, but it's a very interesting way to put it.
Because I do notice that when we did encounter the forces of the Great Red Dragon Qiang Zhao, that his minions demanded tribute, much like your followers did, but instead of where your followers chose something of relatively minor value compared to compared to the other things we carry, something of greater value.
He asks if you noticed anything else about Qiang Zhao's followers while you were in his realm.
They were assholes.
They were
fanatics. Those that followed Qiang Zhao were militantly
to a point where
protective
they
of the dragon.
changed their skin color red.
They seemed very
Yeah.
fearful of Kang Jiao.
And he says, as well they should, Qiang Zhao is a lesser form of dragon, but a dragon he still is. No mortal creature could stand against him.
Do you think that everyone should be fearful of people they can't stand against?
He says that fear is a tool that works very well on evil and untrusting minds. He tells you that Kang Zhao's followers, his sons, his minions, are all of his issue. No doubt you've noticed this. They are red Dragonborn, red scaled kobolds. And he motions to Birdie and Adrex and says, as Qiang Zhao is a lesser form of dragon than myself, so too are your companions lesser forms of dragons than the likes of Qiang Zhao.
Your forces were not. They didn't take on your form.
And then he turns to Windy. He says, as your Yuan-ti friend observes, the divine spark is a form of currency. All dragons come into this world with it, and I suspect so too do the other living gods, your Wind Dukes, or the great Spider Queen of the Underdark, so too the now diminished Lord of Blades. Dragons, however, can procreate in the usual way. He says that he's chosen to do this only once. Qiangxiao has chosen to do this 1,000 times over his life. And each time he bears a half-dragon child. Rather, each time his chosen woman bears a half-dragon child, his divinity sloughs off more and more. So that while now he can field an army of his issue,
he himself is diminished.
And this is the great folly of all chromatic dragons.
So what you're saying is every time they have kids, the kid takes a bit of the dragon with him.
And it's no small amount. You've met half-dragons in your travels. You know that these are warriors of great power who command great loyalty. Theirs is tremendous strength and charisma. And their own issue, the Dragonborn, eventually kobolds and other forms of mortal draconic creatures. And he kind of trails off as he's thinking about something in the past.
I don't know. I was Qiangxiao for an hour and didn't really feel diminished.
Consider that to be you existing as an ant and then becoming Adrex. That's
but you have to understand, Adrex, you probably have some small portion of divine power in you from your sire at that point, so maybe you're about on par once Qiangxiao's had all these kids.
So speaking of having a small portion of divine power, are having children the only way it could be passed on?
He says that he has done a great amount of study into exactly this topic. What divinity even means in the context of creatures like himself. And he says that he suspects that there are greater powers, greater than himself, on other planes of existence. And then another tier beyond that, powers greater still. He says the line also moves in the other direction. There are lower forms of divinity. And he fans his hands out on the table, signifying all of you. So it is my belief that you are all lower forms of divinity. If I am born with a divine spark, and my son was given this spark, if he had had children, if there were an army of golden dragonborn taking the field with my banner, then I must conclude that the bird folk, the snake folk, even the goblinoids in their way, trace back to their ancestral gods.
See, Birdie, I told you we had enough treasure.
Who gave birth to you?
Raazu holds out her hand and displays the mark that she has on her hand, and he says, "You refer to things like this."
He tells you that in eons past, before even his own time, several lives of gold dragons before he walked the earth, before any of the speaking races discovered their capacity for magic, the people that lived on the world, who were not men or elves, but may have been close to these creatures. They may have been their own ancestors, their own spark of divinity in eons past, used rune markings much like this to bind and control the magical energies of the world. Eventually, these peoples learned to wield this power without resorting to such base tactics. But both forms of magic were lost. And now are being regained.
So what of the metal men that we encountered on our way here? I must admit, I had initially been led to believe that since you know so much about us, that these metal men might have been in your employ, but I see that I'm wrong in that regard.
He tells you that there was once a great civilization that encompassed most of what you would come to know as the Northlands. North of the traitorous wall that was built by the men and elves in the far south, that encompassed the regions of the far north as well. Human kingdoms and great dwarven mountains and great sprawling sylvan woods. And what separated this civilization from the peoples of the south is their belief in the living gods. Gods that walked the world, gods that they could see flying in the air, that still granted immeasurable power. But there were, amongst these, there were some of these gods that nobody worshipped. To do so was folly. They did not grant mortals their power. They waged war against them. Some of these are the denizens of the Underdark, who are active to this day, but the most dangerous, as far as these northern kingdoms were concerned, was the Lord of Blades. And in all of my centuries here in this place, before and after the Great Cataclysm, I have not untangled his own mystery. I do not know this creature's origin, nor from whence its power comes. I do know that it has the capacity to create metallic structures and imbue them with life, and it chooses structures that are violent and deadly, that can remain
Raazu
autonomous
nods.
for years without intervention. The patrolmen that you met on the road have been walking that route since time immemorial. When they rust or break or fall apart, another one springs anew from whatever font of divinity the Lord of Blades had under his control.
Hey, Brick, out of character, have I ever heard of a great cataclysm in the ages past before?
Are you trained in history?
Nope.
No, then very nice.
So what
What
was
is
this great cataclysm?
He says that in your travels, you've no doubt come across the ruins of the civilization he speaks of, built by humans, dwarves, and elves.
The Obsidian Spire, that temple that we first received our power from.
He nods. He says that the Obsidian Spire that is inside Kyongjiao's mountain is one such testament to one of these kingdoms.
We broke that, by the way.
He throws his hands up and says, well, fuck.
We didn't trust Kyongjiao and his minions to have access to such great and terrifying power.
He tells you that the spire that you came across was the work of Ibric Thegron. The Ibric Thegron were a massively powerful cult of dwarven wizards who worked probably the most powerful magics known to mortals at the time. That it's said that even great elven seers would consult with them for their wisdom. that they knew magics so primal that they were pulling from the lifeblood of the earth itself. These wizards developed a way to bring dragons to heal. And he describes a system much like the one you discovered in the Obsidian Spire.
Raazu looks at Adrex and says, one of our number had the chance to operate this mechanism.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at with earlier when I said I was Kung Zhao for an hour. Adra starts to look sheepish.
And he says if you had been Kong Zhao for much longer, you would have ceased to be Adrex. Such is the force of a dragon's mind.
Yeah, you're telling me. He was angry all the time. He was just mad, just angry. And I didn't know what that other force was, but I guess I do now. I guess it was horniness. The way hearing you talk about it, he was horny all the time too.
He tells you that most likely Kyung Zhao doesn't feel anger and horniness the way that you might. That these emotions trace back to just a thirst, an unimaginable appetite that cannot be sated. It matters not for what: treasure, lovers, power, land. This thirst is insatiable in all dragons. And then he reaches out and takes the decanter, reaches across the table and fills up Adrex's goblet. And he says, I'm glad it did not overwhelm you, my friend. For I
You
do
and
have
me
need of it."
both. Adrex starts chugging the wine.
And so, what are you thirsty for?
He says, at the moment, more wine.
Birdie raises his hand and asks for tea.
And Brenny are emotions behind him, and as he does, you hear a tea kettle whistling. No reaction.
So-
Birdie just asked for tea, and then
I mean, like, do I have to get up and pour my own tea? I will, but
as Birdie is sitting there pouting about having to get up and walk 2 feet, Brenniar turns his attention back to Red. He says that there are few today that remember the Great Cataclysm. He suspects even the likes of Kyung Zhao would be too young at the time to have great knowledge of it. And he says that the Cataclysm was not the fault of any kingdom or any god or any dragon. There's a war that's been raging since long before the creation of this world, and I suspect will continue to be raging long after this world's destruction. And I suspect that the war continues on many other worlds besides, with many peoples and cultures on all sides of it. He says it's a war of magic. Different forms of magic vying for control.
Why wouldn't the explodey magic just win?
Well, because you build a big enough non-exploding wall. What good is your exploding magic gonna do?
He says, think of the form of magic, the explodey magic, as it were, as the leaves of a great tree. What I speak of is the seed that the tree grew from, the source of the magic. These sources. He nods, because contensus is one of several forms.
And then shadow magic. And
Is
the magic
another.
of the Fae.
Is a fourth.
Is the divine magic outside of this?
He leans back in his chair, and he asks Wendy what she has seen of divine magic.
Well, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what qualifies as divine magic. For example, you appear to have a magical teapot, but I bet Birdie, given enough time, could construct a similar teapot. I don't know what makes yours different, or whether your divine magic allows you to do other types of magic.
Unbeknownst to Wendy, Raazu is just staring at her.
He explains that the effect of magic is not changed by the source of the magic. From the same seed, you may get many shapes and sizes of leaves.
For example, the Hangman's magic, the magic that Birdie casts. The Hangman received it from the shadow. Birdie conjures it from quintessence, I would imagine. And
Birdie are not, since it's just so. He explains that the most visible part of this war, in your experience, would be that between the Feywilds and the Shadowfell, both of which you have experienced firsthand, unless he's mistaken.
Right. Do either of those have to win? Because I'm not a huge fan of either of those.
And Breniar smiles, and he explains that it's not for him to decide who wins. Make no mistake, he could decide a winner. He's just chosen to not take that position.
You abdicate.
What I'm asking are, who are the sides?
He explains 6 in broad terms. Is it 6? I believe it's 6. Why did I open up a mind map from ages and ages ago?
I thought it was 5, as far as I can remember, because there was the 4. Because way back in like the first or second session, there was the Quicksilver doll, which we assumed to be contestants. Mm-hmm. Then there were 4 claws that were constantly tearing at it. If I remember that correct.
I'm just waiting for Photoshop to catch up with me because I opened the wrong template. He describes the Fey and Shadow magic as being 2 such sources. That's the wrong template too. A third source you might consider to be blood magic. Magical creatures that are able to do supernatural things, not as a function of their study in wizardry, but as a function of their birth. And he says to Wendy that this is the sort of thing he would classify his own magic as. He's not able to do these miraculous things because of some external force, but rather the magic in his own form. Here we go.
Birdie whispers to Wendy, he makes good tea, but she's like holding his tongue because he burnt it.
Hey.
He says that a 4th version might be what you would consider to be divine magic from an external force. Magic granted from beyond this world to creatures that dwell here. And he tells you that historically this magic has not been particularly strong in the North. The North has always held their living gods. However, there is one among you who has been touched by such a deity.
Raazu nods.
He says, but there is a 5th form as well. And this is the magic of the battlefield itself. If you consider these 4 sides, to use Wendy's term, they would only lay waste to the fields and those that dwell there. Civilizations would rise and fall as control of blood magic or fairy magic waned and waxed, but the world itself would suffer, and so the world itself devised its own shield, a fifth source of magic. And then he nods to Raazu. Says, which you know as Quintessence. The cataclysm came last time one of these great wars was fought. The Lord of Blades was advancing south and would have swept across the entire continent. He had laid waste to several of my brethren at the time. Great dwarven armies had fallen before his might. There were rebels in the Lord of Blades' own numbers, metal men who grew consciousness and joined the ranks of the defenders, and he cut them down as well. It was thought that the only way to combat him was to use immeasurable forces of magic. He describes his battle taking place over centuries of time. Civilizations would rise and fall, always knowing the threat of the Lord of Blades. And eventually he says, the world itself, in order to put a stop to all of this destruction, cracked asunder. And in doing so, created the wall that you climbed to reach this place. The enormous amount of magic that was released during this time decimated all of these great civilizations. Overnight, hundreds of thousands of peoples, of men, of orcs, elves, dwarven wizards, lesser dragons, giants, all of the peoples of the north. The obliteration was immeasurable. And then the magic went quiet and seeped back into the world and began to sleep. And that's the last anyone has heard of the Lord of Blades' advance. Since then, his forces have been rusted, crumbling.
And yet they still remain on patrol up here. And their observation devices. Birdie, you have one of those, don't you?
Birdie pulls out one of the, digs through his pack. Give me a minute. Starts throwing all kinds of his random garbage out and pulls out the little glass container with the inert, hopefully.
Yeah, it's laying curled up in the bottom of the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Student 9, right?
Yeah, that
yes. That was...
Yeah, Adrex talks about Student 9.
Bernier says that it sounds like Student 9 is a descendant. Probably is not the correct term for their people. They're not born as such. But there are still small groups of these metal creatures. All armies have their deserters, as the Lord of Blades did as well. It's possible that this man is searching for clues of his own past. It's possible that he knows something I don't.
Unfortunately, we parted ways with him some months ago after we departed Jiang Zhao's realm. Don't know where he is at the moment.
He was heading west to look for, what's his name that we met in the Underdark?
Grey aggro?
Bronzel.
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 Yeah,
Bronzel.
he was going to look for Bronzel.
I'm just impressed I'm remembering all these names.
He explains that it's his belief that in the days to come, there will be a second cataclysm. the magic of the world is beginning to seep back. We see this now in peoples much like yourselves who have awakened to it. The world is selecting its champions for the next great war.
Metaphorical days or literal days? Adrex suddenly looks very concerned.
He says he's not sure.
In the realm of prophecy, things are generally generally not literal.
And he shakes his head and says that prophecy is the purview of lesser races who are not gifted with long years and foresight the way he is. He says prophecy... Well, the problem with prophecy is it pertains to these types of cataclysms is that for the past several eons there's not been a civilization here with which to prophesize. There are few enough people who remember the previous cataclysm to see the signs of the upcoming one. And then he reads the room a little bit. And he chuckles to himself. And he says, "Forgive me, I have brought down the tone of conversation."
It all seems to be interconnected anyway.
We're all pretty for learning about things that will kill us beforehand.
In an effort to stop them, cataclysm. Whew. It's a big word.
He says, "Indeed it is."
So,
but the cataclysm was... Go ahead.
You mentioned something about there being lots of worlds? I thought it was just this world and the Shadowfell and the Fate.
And then he just slides a piece of paper across the table with an onion and an asterisk that says "See previous campaign."
I was wondering if he was going to slide an onion.
He tells you that perhaps it is incorrect to look at the cataclysm as an ending, as a great coming of death. For though it did spell the end of civilizations great and terrible, and it puts the footnote on ancient arcane magics, it gave rise to new cultures and new peoples, and he waves to all of you. So before the cataclysm, there would have been no great armies of orcs or goblins to make their mark upon the land. There would have been no colorful monasteries of the Windfolk. Says there would be none of the humble Moakton or Bearfolk in their villages in the valleys. Says the cataclysm is not an ending to be deterred. You can't stop it from coming. Picture it like a wave crashing against the shore. You can't stop the waves.
Picture that. We've seen it.
Brags
Raazu hasn't seen it. Haven't seen it.
So you can't stop the waves from coming, but every time it laps the shore, it leaves it in a different shape. The world is different now than it was when I was young, and it will be different again.
If there's a tidal wave coming, can we just, go inland?
And he nods, and he says you can run from the coming days if you like. If you run far enough south, you may find a place where its effects are not noticeable. If you go beyond the walls to the human lands and cross them safely and find their southern coasts and perhaps board a sailing vessel and go further south indeed into lands stranger and unimaginable even to myself.
You would likely end up in chains, Birdie.
What about if we wanted to build a wall to shape the coming waves?
He says he believes that's exactly what you're intended to do. He says, after all, it was the magic of the world that found you, that chose you to be its champions. What you do with this power now that you have it is largely up to you. I could guide you and give you advice, but I have decided not to take shape myself. This is not my place, nor my decision. The coming cataclysm, whatever shape it leaves the world in, I mean to leave it.
The world or the shape of the world?
And he nods.
I
Birdie
say the
goes-
word liberation.
Birdie just kind of like rubs his temples and like mumbles like he hates it when people do that.
It's big, Birdie. It's very big.
He tells you that he's been keeping, through his divinations, he has seen many of these people have awoken to magic. Most of them have the same marks that you do, the mark of quintessence. However,
There are others that don't.
there are others that don't.
My my brother in faith, Yashnars, is one such person. The Dwergar woman who tried to sabotage the Captain Ice, she bore a similar mark.
He says that some of these people, as you've seen, have chosen to use their powers for greed, for their own advancement. He says, on my own southern borders, a man from the south has arrived, has climbed the plateau, and is using his own mark for petty revenge against creatures he deems too unworthy to live. But you five have a different stated goal that you've been working towards for the past... Not really quite correct to say that it's been a full year, because you guys spend a lot of time in the Feywild, which stretches things out a bit.
We were at sea for a while too.
Wait. What? The ocean doesn't follow different temporal rules.
And Breniar corrects you and says, it does indeed. And then, as so to punctuate his point, he motions to the coffee maker behind you.
I just meant in terms of trying to figure out how long in game-wise it's been. But sure, let's run with this.
I think it has been almost a year, a little over a year in actual game terms. But I think several months of that was stretched out while you were in the Feywild.
During the Feywild, yeah. Well, like we ended up losing a whole year going around after we came back from the Feywild. I do remember that.
So you mentioned earlier that there are traitors in every war. Could one of the people who had been chosen by someone not the quintessence still fight for them?
Raazu leans forward a little bit.
He regards Red and Raazu very carefully. And then he asks, what if the answer to that question is no?
I mean, is it?
He asks, what if the moment comes and you have to make a choice?
What's the choice?
He says it will be
Pretty
Between the
great
two
and
of us
terrible
for the
choice
safety of
indeed.
the world.
Well, that sounds like a false choice.
Yeah, I don't like that choice. That choice sucks.
He says in the coming days you're going to have to make a great many very difficult choices.
Well, if the quintessence didn't want us to make these choices, it shouldn't have chosen us.
Adrex scratches his armpit.
He asks Wendy what she imagined the contestants might want. And he emphasizes the word wants in that sentence.
Preservation? Seemed like you were saying that earlier one of the sides was winning, and then suddenly everything changed. That implies to me that it doesn't want one of the sides to win.
And he says we see the same thing in conventional warfare, do we not? If the goblins hold a mill, and the orcs come over the hill to take it, the goblins don't want to give up that ground.
Yeah, but in war, there's also like peace and treaties and stuff, ceasefires. Why does it have to be a cataclysm? Why is it all or nothing?
All of these things are bent to the explicit purpose of showing who has the mill. The question you may have to answer, the choice you may have to make, is whether a mill is the best thing for the peoples who are fighting over it, or not. Will you leave the mill standing, or will you raise it and erect something else in its place, or find some other solution?
So, what exactly are all the sides actually fighting over?
What do any sides in war want to fight over? Control.
Control of what? Can we get less general and more specific, less cryptic and concrete here?
Because it sounds, when you talk about your own divine magic, you're talking about using it up. But we've found when we use our magic, it comes back, and sometimes even comes back stronger.
And he nods, and he says that is the case for, and please excuse the terminology, but for lesser forms of magic.
Well, you could come up with other terminology, but that's fine.
He says that, make no mistake, that magic is a resource, and it can be spent, and it can be used up. It can also be generated, and he's explained 5 ways how that might work. But if you imagine magic as a pool, and every so often you put a dropper in the pool to take a small quantity to power some spell, and he describes some of the spells that he uses to, for example, block an arrow coming in at you, or create the shadowy tentacles that break up out of the ground. This is for a true miracle, for true magical creation. You sink not a dropper, but a barrel. And if 100 people come to the pool, all carrying barrels, the pool itself is in danger.
So, is the quintessence the pool?
He says he likes to think of it as not the pool itself, but an entity who is charged with its guardianship. That during the cataclysm, this guardian decided enough was enough. That the pool would be off limits until further notice. And we saw magic diminish. The great wizards and warlocks ceased to be. There is still some magic far to the south, but not like there once was. All of the magic that you've known for most of your lives have been blood magic, like my own, or the magic of the Feywild, or the Shadowfell. So what's happening now is the opposite. The world has decided that mundanity has run its course. To reopen the flow of magic into the world, to create a new era where these wizards and warlocks could return, where anybody could train and use these abilities. And that he believes that the beginning of this era will start with a cataclysm that leaves the world a different shape than it was before. And then he turns back to Red and Raazu. He says that you and your companions have decided to make it your mission to save the world, to leave it better than you found it. And you've done this consistently. In fact, I have here a ledger containing one bosun Bob? My God, that asshole needed to die.
Raazu looks to Red and says, Red gonna do what Red gonna do.
That's what we said.
You got there before me.
Red just nods.
Raazu says, whatever happened to me after I took that stab on the oceans to when I woke up in the holds of the city of the Kovnos, I felt a pull toward the ocean that I'm meant to protect it. And I'm meant to protect those oceans. And whatever form this cataclysm takes, that's where I see my efforts to be directed.
He asks, wouldn't it serve you better than to captain a ship and go out to sea?
I have considered that, yes, but I swore to myself that I would finish this business before I return to the ocean.
He tells you the ocean, too, has its own measure of primordial war. He says, one of these... You've met the denizens of one such creature.
Raazu
And he
nods.
describes the Kraken cult that you brushed elbows with.
Okay.
The others told me about it.
I thought he was going to say the butt pirates.
The butt
Those
pirates
protectors
really
of the
aren't
ocean.
denizens as such.
I know, but that's immediately where my brain was. I forgot about the Kraken cult. I was like, he's going to say the butt pirates are like a major force in the ocean or something.
I assure you the butt pirates are not a major force in anything.
Anymore.
But he explains that if you go deep enough in the ocean and you dive past the point where light no longer reaches, and you reach low enough where the pressure of the water begins to crack your bones, and go deeper and deeper still, past the wrecks of great ships, sunk civilizations, you will eventually find an extension of the land. If you were to go deeper than that, tunnel into the earth that you find underneath the crushing of the oceans, you would not have to dig very deep before the planet doesn't know the difference between an ocean and a continent. The land is the same all throughout.
And if that land is sundered, then the oceans will vanish as well. And that's why I'm here.
He explains that his...
Underdark gets new beachfront property, though.
God, that would be a great campaign. Like, a good campaign finale, just going down to the ocean seafloor and, like, doing something massive to just flood the entire Underdark.
All I'm saying is you promised the butt pirates weren't important, and then you said if you reach deep into the cracks of the ocean...
Wow.
Yeah, so...
Do we fire Nodal? Do we fire him?
You can't. I've tried.
That's true.
Nodal, you're my favorite. Don't ever change.
But all you've said so far is just confirming that the way I've chosen is the correct one.
He tells you that correct is not a good mindset to be in when you're discussing things of this nature. Whether or not you're doing the right or the wrong thing is impossible to say. For example, he says during the ages before the first cataclysm, there arose great champions and heroes from all corners of the kingdoms that tried to fight it and stop it and hold it back. But if they had done so, the world that you know would never have existed. There would never be a great civilization of Aarakocra in the mountaintops. There would never have been great armies of goblinoids in the southern fields. Your peoples, as you know them, your histories, and that of all of your descendants, your marks on the world, could never have been written.
Well, sure, but you could use that to justify anything.
I mean, you could also use that to justify that they failed, because the Yuan-ti haven't exactly been a good for the world.
And he says that's true, but, conversely, during the ages past, the ages of the great kingdoms, there were cults of evil dwarves. There were elves bent to human genocide.
Conversely, that the Yuan-ti civilization would not have created someone like you. Someone who knows that what their people are doing is wrong.
I'm pretty sure my existence does not in any way counteract all the evil the Yuan-ti have done over the years.
I don't know, Red, you're pretty good.
You're pretty good.
He
At any rate, I mean,
at least 5. He can't say at least 5 of the
Of 5 atrocities.
right.
At any rate, I think that sort of thinking is, quite frankly, beyond my mortal brain. I'm trying to do the most good for the most people that are alive in the world today. And if those people go on to good or evil, all I can do is hope to inspire or guide against that.
Bruniar tells Red that that's well said. There's going to be good and even evil in the world, whether you stop the cataclysm or hasten it. To concern yourself with such things on a grand scale, to lull yourself into believing that stopping this cataclysm or